Okay, so you want to own a funeral home. People call it the perfect business. Nobody skips dying. Recessions don't change that. Pandemics don't change that. Banks line up to lend against it. It sounds like the most recession-proof business in America. It is not the business you think it is. The average funeral home keeps 10.3 cents of every dollar it earns. That number has been falling for over a decade. And here's what nobody warns you about before you sign. A grieving family can walk through your door and spend nothing. Say no to a casket, massa, and the math falls apart. By the end of this video, you will understand why a guaranteed customer base is no longer enough, who is quietly buying up funeral homes across the country. Let's start with what it actually costs to open the doors. What it costs to get in. There are 18,874 funeral homes operating in the United States. A decade ago, there were over 22,000. Most of the survivors are small, most are independently owned, and almost all of them started the same way. Someone with deep roots in their community, a belief that this work mattered, a loan signed against a building for a ritual that hasn't changed in generations. Let's talk about what that loan actually covers. A modest existing funeral home costs $150,000 to buy. On the high end, it can run $500,000. That covers the building. The basic equipment, your first round of caskets. A new build from the ground up is a different number entirely. Budget $750,000. On the low end, on the high end, $2,500,000. That's land, construction, and a prep room that meets state code. The building itself isn't optional. You need a viewing room for a family and 80 guests. You need a preparation room with hospital-grade ventilation. You need walk-in refrigeration running every single hour of every day. None of that is negotiable. None of it is cheap. The embalming equipment alone runs $50,000. On the high end, $200,000. Stainless steel tables, drainage systems, chemical storage that passes a fire inspection. Then there's the fleet. A single hearse costs $80,000 new. A nicer model runs $150,000. Most homes need a second vehicle just for flowers and family. Add a third for the funeral director's personal use. Each one needs regular maintenance. Each one needs commercial insurance on top of your general liability policy. Then there's signage and the building itself. A chapel needs a marquee, lighting, and landscaping. All of it has to signal dignity from the street. Budget $15,000 for that alone. On the high end, $40,000. Then the inventory. You need 15 caskets sitting in a showroom before you sell one. On the high end, 25. That's $20,000 in dead stock. On the high end, $80,000. Depreciating. Waiting. You need urns, you need vaults, you need outer burial containers in every size a family might ask for. Add another $30,000, on the high end, $100,000 before you've served a single family. Then licensing. Most states require a licensed funeral director, separately a licensed embalmer. Two different people, two different 2-year mortuary science degrees. The facility itself needs its own license on top of theirs. Zoning approval, background checks, health inspections, fire inspections. Compliance alone runs $10,000. Funerals get billed after the service, often after an insurance claim clears, then which can take capital. Funerals get billed after the service, often after an insurance claim clears, which can take weeks. You need 6 months of payroll sitting untouched in the bank. That's another $50,000. On the high end, $170,000 just to survive the gap. Add it all up, the realistic cost to open a funeral home in America starts at $150,000. It can climb past $2,500,000, and you haven't served a single family yet. But here's where it gets complicated. Most new owners don't build from scratch. They buy an existing home. Its name, its reputation, its case history. That sounds like the safer move. It isn't always, because what you're inheriting along with the chapel and the hearse is someone else's reputation in a town that doesn't forget. A pre-need contract backlog, signed at prices set years ago. Some of those contracts were locked in 15 years ago, before you ever owned the building. A walk-in cooler from 1998. It looks fine until the day it fails. Deferred maintenance you can't see until you own it. $100,000 worth on average. And this business doesn't come with a trial period. It comes with a community that's been watching this address for decades, and that scrutiny starts the day you sign the deed. So once the doors are open, how do you actually get paid back? How the money flows, not the way you'd think. A funeral home doesn't sell one thing, it sells a basic fee. Then a list of choices, one at a time. Here's what the casket math actually looks like. A mid-range casket costs the funeral home $1,000 to bring in. You sell it to the family for $5,000. That sounds like an 80% margin. It isn't. Out of that $5,000, $1,000 goes to the casket itself. $1,000 covers the staff who present it and deliver it. They set it up to. $800 covers your share of the building's monthly cost. $700 covers insurance, utilities, and the fee the card processor takes. That leaves $1,500. $1,500 on a $5,000 casket. That's a 30% margin on a good week before a family asks for a payment plan. And here's the part that makes this business structurally fragile. Federal law requires you to let families buy that casket elsewhere. A family can order the same casket online for $1,200. You're required to accept the delivery. You can't charge a handling fee. You can't refuse it at the door. You can't penalize them for shopping around. So that $1,500 margin you were counting on can vanish the moment a family runs a search. 5 minutes and that margin is gone. Now look at the vault. A concrete burial vault costs the funeral home $600 wholesale. You sell it to the family for $1,800. That looks even better. A 200% markup. But the vault has to be delivered to the cemetery. That's a truck, a driver, and an hour of fuel. $120 gone before the vault even reaches the grave. The cemetery charges you a placement fee just to set it. $150 every time. That leaves $930 of real profit. On an item that looked like pure margin 5 seconds ago, the same applies to embalming. It's optional in every state by federal rule. A family that skips it saves you nothing. They save themselves up to $1,000. There's one more wrinkle most new owners never see coming. Pre-need contracts. A family pays today. They lock in today's price for a funeral that hasn't happened yet. That money sits in a trust, untouched, sometimes for 20 years. But your costs don't sit still. Labor goes up, caskets go up, fuel for the hearse goes up year after year. By the time that contract finally comes due, you may be delivering a $9,000 funeral for the $6,000 a family paid back in 2014. So, you're locked into a narrow, fragile margin, high enough on paper to look healthy, thin enough in practice that one transparent family changes everything. The only lever you actually have left is volume. More traditional burials, more embalming, more families who want the full version of the service, fewer direct cremations. Almost nothing on that list gets sold at all. Because the math only works one way. Most families have to choose the expensive version of grief. Most don't anymore. And it's not just cremation pulling the average down. Even families who choose burial are negotiating harder than they used to. Comparison shopping between funeral homes has become normal, not rare. Some families now call 3 homes before they pick one, so the margin is shrinking on the revenue side. It's about to get worse on the cost side, too. This is where the real problem lives. Because keeping the lights on here costs more than people assume. You need a licensed funeral director on call every hour. You need an embalmer. You need drivers. You need someone answering the phone at 3 a.m. That's 6 people minimum, even for a small operation. On the high end, 10. A funeral director earns $49,800 a year on average. A senior embalmer can earn $85,940. Across a small staff, that's $300,000 a year in payroll alone. On the high end, $500,000 before benefits, before overtime, before the call that comes in on Christmas Eve. Then facility costs. A walk-in cooler failure costs $4,000 to repair. It always fails without warning. An embalming table, a hearse transmission, a chapel H5C system that dies in the middle of August. None of it can wait, because none of your customers can wait either. Then insurance, general liability and property coverage runs $5,000 a year. On the high end, $15,000. Higher still if you operate your own crematory. Higher still if a single mistake becomes a lawsuit, and those lawsuits are not rare in this industry. Wrong remains released to the wrong family. Cremated ashes mixed up between 2 services on the same afternoon. One error like that ends a reputation built across 3 generations. And then there's the cost nobody in this industry says out loud. The consolidators. Service Corporation International operates 1,900 funeral homes across North America. You've probably never heard the name. That's by design. Behind the scenes, SCI operates under a brand called Dignity Memorial, but almost none of their locations carry that name on the building. They keep the name of the family they bought it from. Sometimes that family sold a decade ago, sometimes 2 decades ago. Most visitors never check. SC. I buys an independent funeral home. It keeps the original family name on the sign. The website looks the same, the lobby looks the same, and the owner you used to know, he might still greet you at the door, but the business now reports to shareholders in Houston, Texas. Every pricing decision runs through a corporate finance team now, not your neighbor. And despite operating at a scale that should lower costs, SCI consistently charges more than independent funeral homes do. Not occasionally. Across markets, year after year. For families, that means paying more. To a company they think is still local. For you, the independent owner, it means something worse. SCI doesn't just compete with you, it buys the funeral home down the street. It raises that home's prices. It uses the extra cash to buy the next one. Every acquisition makes the next acquisition easier to fund. In a single recent decade, SCI closed acquisitions worth $1.4 billion. Most of those targets used to be your fiercest local competition. Service Corporation International is doing to local funeral homes. Buying the name, keeping the face, changing who actually profits. Every dollar that flows up to Houston is a dollar that never touches your town again. Not your staff, not your community. The family who signed that contract never finds out who they actually paid. That's the cost nobody warned you about before you open the doors. But it's not even the biggest threat to this business, the disappearing ritual. Here's the part of this business most people never understand. You are not running a funeral home. A funeral home, as a phrase, sells you on permanence. A fixed price, a fixed ritual, a fixed expectation of what happens when someone dies. That permanence is an illusion. In 1960, the cremation rate in America was 3.6%. Almost nobody chose it. Almost everybody bought the full ritual. Viewing, embalming, casket, burial plot. The entire industry was built around that one assumption. You are running a business that sells a ritual, and the ritual is disappearing faster than the customers. In 2025, 63.4% of Americans chose cremation over burial. Just 31.6% chose a traditional burial. By 2045, the cremation rate is projected to reach 82.3%. That's not a shift in taste. That's the collapse of your highest margin product. A traditional burial funeral generates $7,848 in average revenue. A full-service cremation generates $6,280. A direct cremation generates as little as $1,000. No viewing, no embalming, no casket sold at all. Now run the math. A funeral home handling 113 cases a year. That's the average for a member of the National Funeral Directors Association. All traditional burial, $886,000 in annual revenue. Half burial, half full-service cremation, $837,000. 80% cremation, still with full services, $630,000. 80% cremation, mostly direct, $300,000. 4 versions of the exact same funeral home. Same building, same staff, same number of families walking through your door, less than a third of the income for doing the exact same job with the exact same care. This is what separates a funeral home from almost every other business. A diner can raise its prices when food costs spike. A gas station can shift to higher margin snacks and drinks. A funeral home cannot talk a grieving family into a casket they don't want. You can't upsell someone who's still in shock. You can't run a limited time promotion on a burial plot. There is no loyalty program for grief. The product hasn't gotten worse. The customer has changed what they're willing to buy, and the reasons aren't a mystery. Cremation costs less, it moves faster, it carries less religious obligation than it did 50 years ago. For a generation raised on minimalism, it simply fits how they want to be remembered. So you're not selling caskets, vaults, and embalming anymore. Most of your future customers will buy none of those 3 things. You're selling a phone call answered at 2 a.m., a body picked up with dignity, the same night it's needed, a piece of paper filed correctly, the first time, 45 minutes of someone's full, undivided attention. That's the entire product now, and most owners haven't figured that out yet. The ones who have are pulling ahead of everyone else in town. Here's what that actually looks like in practice. Who actually makes money? One funeral home in New Hampshire figured it out a century early because some independent owners are thriving in exactly this environment. Not all of them, not even most of them, but the ones who crack the code follow a specific pattern. Meet the Faina family of Manchester, New Hampshire. Their story starts in 1906, but not in Manchester. Jean-Baptiste Faneuf opened the first Faneuf funeral home in Nashua. For almost 30 years, it stayed a Nashua-only business. In 1935, his son moved the family to Manchester, 3 small children in tow. He leased a small building across from the local hospital. For decades, it served the city's French-Canadian community on the west side. It was respected. It was small. It stayed small for the next 3 decades, and in the late 1960s, Manchester's largest funeral home came up for sale. It was called Let André Funeral Service. Most small operators would have stayed in their lane. Arthur Faneuf didn't. He bought it. He merged the 2 names into one firm. By the early 1970s, the combined firm served 350 families a year. In 1989, Arthur handed the business to his son, Buddy Faneuf. That made Buddy the 4th generation to run the firm. Today, Faneuf is on its 5th generation of family leadership. The company operates multiple locations and crematories across 2 states. It's the largest provider of funeral and cremation services in New England. The pattern behind Faneuf is the same pattern behind every funeral home that's still thriving, while cremation eats away at the rest of the industry. First, location, not concept. FANF opened its newest locations near hospitals, highway exits, and aging neighborhoods. Funeral homes that wait for foot traffic are waiting for the wrong thing entirely. Be wherever death is statistically going to happen most. Second, own the building, never lease it. FANF owns its properties outright across every town it operates in. No landlord can raise their rent the year cremation rates spike again. That single decision removed the largest fixed cost, the one most independent owners never escape. Third, build the crematory before you need it. In 1995, FANF installed the first crematorium in the city. While competitors treated cremation as a threat, FANF treated it as the next product line. By the time cremation became the national majority, they already owned the equipment. Fourth, expand the same way the corporations do. FANF grew through acquisition, exactly like Service Corporation International, but every acquisition stayed family-run. Same local name, same local staff. They used the consolidator's playbook without becoming a consolidator. Fifth, they stopped treating cremation as a loss. Most independents still price cremation as a smaller version of a burial. FANF built standalone cremation packages, their own dignity, their own ceremony options. Families who wanted simple still felt like they got something. That's revenue most competitors leave on the table entirely. Sixth, never stop being the family that answers the phone. A fourth-generation owner still meets grieving families in person. That single fact is the entire reason families choose them over the corporate option 10 minutes down the road. No call center, no regional manager approving a casket customization request 3 days later. Across the country, the funeral homes still standing after generational ownership almost always show the same lineage. The founder builds the reputation. The second generation builds the volume. The third or fourth generation builds the systems that let the reputation outlive its founder. That's 3 or 4 generations to build something most new owners assume should already be profitable in year 1. It isn't. Most new owners run out of patience long before they reach generation 2. So let's see exactly what that costs you. 2 funeral homes, same industry, very different futures. Scenario 1. You buy an existing funeral home in a mid-size American city. Established reputation, steady, unremarkable case volume. You invested $400,000 to take it over. Your loan payment alone runs $3,200 a month. Annual revenue, $700,000 on the low end. $900,000 on the high end, reflecting today's burial to cremation mix. Payroll eats 40% of that, $280,000 on the low end. $360,000 on the high end. Facility, equipment, and insurance take another $100,000. On the high end, $150,000. Merchandise and cash advance costs take $150,000. On the high end, $200,000. Net profit, $80,000 a year. On the high end, $120,000. On a $400,000 investment, answering calls 24 hours a day. That's a 20 to 30% return on paper. But it assumes the cremation rate in your market stops climbing. It won't. Run that same business forward to 2035 at 80% cremation. Revenue falls to $630,000, even with the same families walking through your door. Net profit drops to $40,000 a year. On the high end, $60,000. Half the return for the exact same amount of work. You didn't do anything wrong. The product this business was built around, it simply isn't what people are buying anymore. Scenario 2. You're the FANF family, 5 generations. 120 years into this business, you own your buildings outright. Your mortgage was paid off decades ago. You run your own crematory so that revenue never leaves the building. Your case volume spans 6 locations instead of 1. Across those 6 locations, they employ more than 40 full-time staff. Combined annual revenue clears $4,200,000. Your service mix already reflects where the entire country is heading. Net profit margin runs above 15%, well above the industry's 10.3% average. Not counting the real estate you've owned debt-free for decades. That's a real business. But it took 5 generations, 1 crematory built ahead of the trend, a willingness to expand while competitors waited to be bought out. The funeral home didn't make the FANF family wealthy. Refusing to stand still did. The American funeral home has survived for over a century. It survived the rise of the automobile. It survived the decline of the front parlor. It survived 2 world wars. It survived a pandemic that filled its calendar and emptied its chapels at the very same time. It survived because of something no corporation has fully replicated. The feeling that the person arranging your worst day actually lives in your town. That's worth something, but that's also the trap. Because the ritual that built this business is the same ritual families are now choosing to skip, simplify, or shop around for online. The numbers don't lie even when the obituary does. Fewer caskets, fewer viewings, fewer full-price services to cover the building's mortgage. The business you think you're buying is permanence. The business you're actually buying is a daily bet that grief will still be expensive enough often enough to keep the lights on. Some owners are already adapting that bet to what their town actually needs now. Most are still selling what people bought 40 years ago, waiting for a market that has already moved on without telling them. Nobody skips dying. The question is whether you still want to own the place where they don't.